Chapter I, Introduction and Summary, J. Billingham, A Planetary and Global Biology, a New Perspective. For many years, the Life Sciences program of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, has included studies of the origin and evolution of life. These studies have focused on chemical evolution, the origin of life, the early evolution of life, and the search for life and life-related molecules in the solar system. Inevitably, the studies are closely linked with the physics and chemistry of planetary environments, that is, with planetary science. It has recently become apparent that the existing NASA programs in planetary biology have not addressed some important questions. Previous research work focused upon the biological evolution of microorganisms over most of Precambrian time, but did not consider evolutionary processes operative after the appearance of eukaryotic cells. In other words, the biological evolution of the most recent 1 billion years, including that of the entire Phanerozoic on, from 570 Maya ago to the present, has not been examined by the NASA Planetary Biology program. This report is addressed specifically to certain questions about evolution during this latter interval, from that of the first multicellular organisms to that operating today. We have arbitrarily called the eukaryotic and multicellular organisms of this billion-year interval complex life. It is important to emphasize that what is proposed in this report is the study of complex life in a context that differs from that considered by contemporary evolutionary biologists. Current work in the field, supported by the National Science Foundation, NSF, the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and other organizations, deals specifically with the delineation of the mechanisms of biological evolution on the Earth. These mechanisms are usually intrinsic terrestrial ones, stemming from genetic properties of organisms, their competitive and cooperative relationships, and their relationships with particular terrestrial environments. This report examines the possibility of studying the evolution of complex biological systems in another context, that of space. Specifically, it considers the effects of properties of the universe as a whole upon the evolutionary processes occurring on a planet's surface. What are the effects on life of the planet's satellites, of the variability of its sun, of the meteors and comets that bombard it, of peculiarities of its orbit and rotation, of its passage through the dust clouds and star fields of its galaxy, and of events in the space in which it is situated. Specifically, how have these extraplanetary factors affected life on Earth? No systematic and comprehensive analysis of these potentially important factors has been made. Date. This new view, detailed in the pages that follow, we define as the echo perspective, echo =, evolution of complex and higher organisms. The echo perspective defines several new and important groups of questions that relate evolutionary biology to planetary properties and events in space, and hence to a spectrum of fundamental studies and missions being pursued by NASA. Questions of a first group address the relationships between biological evolution and events in space. To what extent has the evolution of complex life here on the Earth been affected by phenomena such as Sun-Earth interactions, changes in solar activity, gravitational dynamics of the solar system, astrophysical events such as supernovae, and collisions between the Earth and comets or asteroids? We are now learning that such events can cause periodic changes and irregular disturbances of great significance in the biosphere. Their possible influence on biological evolution has only recently been recognized and is poorly understood. Questions of a second group involve extension of our findings about the evolution of complex life in the familiar terrestrial set, ting out into the universe as a whole. If we know how life is affected by events in space, then what types of galactic, stellar, and planetary environments suitable for complex life can be identified elsewhere in the universe? Are the general principles of biological evolution, as they are understood for the planet Earth, equally applicable to Earth like planets of other stars? Could the evolution of complex life on planets of other sizes or situated in different galactic environments have taken much less time than it did on the Earth? More time? Can complex life exist on the planets of stars in multiple star systems? There are many such questions. At present, they are formidably difficult to answer, but they are clearly important to the biologist interested in extraterrestrial life. Questions of a third group have to do with the improvements in resolution of past events that can follow from utilizing the geological signatures of extraterrestrial disturbances. An asteroid impact in ancient time might have spread traces of iridium or some other material over the entire globe within a year or so. What can we learn of the biogeography, the dispersion of the continents, the climate at various latitudes, and other attributes of the Earth at that ancient time, knowing now that the modern iridium trace identifies sediments that were all forming at the same geologic instant? Can improved understanding of climatic responses to the complex wobbles and movements of the Earth built into its orbit and rotation at the time of its formation help us to assign more narrowly constrained age limits to important strata whose times of formation are now estimable only within a few million years? These and other improvements in our understanding of the Earth and its living organisms are likely to follow from recognition and delineation of the various interactions between events on the Earth's surface and properties of space and the solar system. The members of the Science Workshop group who prepared this report addressed the evolution of complex and higher organisms in a logical sequence of chapters. First, in a chapter entitled Life, Terrestrial Environments, and Events in Space, there is a general statement of our current knowledge of biological evolution, followed by a summary of some of the major categories of research questions that the Science Working Group felt were important. The next 3 chapters address the terrestrial evolutionary story in some detail. Each of these chapters identifies specific and important research questions that should be included in a program to examine the evolution of complex and higher organisms in the context of space. The next chapter identifies extraterrestrial factors that may have had important effects on the evolution of complex life on the Earth. This chapter also includes specific recommendations for research that is likely to yield new information in this field. Finally, there is a brief chapter complex, Life Elsewhere in Space, that deals with questions about the possible evolution of complex and higher organisms elsewhere in the universe. This chapter identifies problems associated with the study of possibilities for extraterrestrial complex life, as well as feasible research objectives, and proposes, perhaps, the most intriguing, and at the same time the most difficult research tasks of all. It is our conclusion that there are many questions of major scientific importance in the Etseco area and that a research program should be structured by NASA to address these questions. The interdisciplinary nature of the ECHO approach holds promise for the development of new concepts, new hypotheses for testing, and new knowledge of evolutionary biology, now in the context of space. An ECAC program would fill out the scope of NASA. Work on planetary biology now confined essentially to Precambrian time, so that it would eventually encompass those crucial events, beginning with the advent of multicellular organisms that have led to the rich diversity of complex and higher organisms we see today. We recommend that NASA initiate a modest new study of the evolution of complex and higher organisms in the context of space. The program should be organized along the same structural lines as the existing planetary biology programs and should heavily involve the scientific community. We also recommend that NASA's experience in planetary sciences, instrumentation, new technologies, and experiments on orbiting and planetary spacecraft be brought to bear on the functional scientific questions wherever that is appropriate. B. Summary of this report. 1. This report examines the subject of the evolution of complex and higher organisms ECHO in the context of space. 2. 3 major aspects of the link between ECHO and space are considered. The first is the extent to which the evolution of complex life on the Earth has been influenced by events in space, particularly by astrophysical, solar, and solar system phenomena. The second is the important general question of the possibility of the evolution of complex life elsewhere in the universe. The third is the extent to which the geological signatures of extraterrestrial events, whether or not they affected evolution, can be used to refine studies of past geographies, climates, and life. 3. Following this chapter, there are 6 chapters 2 through the 7th that deal with various technical aspects of SHAPO. Chapter 2 provides a detailed synopsis of the report as a whole. The other chapters are arranged in a logical sequence as follows. Background material on the history of complex organisms and terrestrial physical-chemical environments, chapters the 3rd and IV. Details of evolutionary processes and their responsiveness to environmental and extraterrestrial factors, chapter V. The effects of extraterrestrial phenomena upon evolution, chapter ZIC, and the potential for complex life elsewhere in space, chapter the 8. Each of these chapters concludes with a section on recommended research topics. These research recommendations are summarized at the end of chapter 2. 4. In the past, interactions between scientists of previously isolated disciplines have produced remarkable progress in science. We consider this to be the case with ECAC. The strong stimulus of interdisciplinary thinking was apparent throughout the meetings and bodes well for the outcome of future research on the evolution of complex and higher organisms in the context of space. More important, the fundamental questions identified by the ETSICAS Science Working Group are inherently challenging, exciting, and significant. For both these reasons, we conclude that study of the evolution of complex and higher organisms conducted in the context of space is a fertile field that holds promise for the development of new concepts, new research endeavors for examination of those concepts, new instrumentation, and a new and broader knowledge of evolutionary biology. 5. We also conclude that the research areas that have been identified constitute a logical addition to NASA's existing planetary biology program. The incorporation of an ECHO endeavor would complement existing work on the origin and early evolution of life and would explore the full spectrum of evolutionary events that constitute the subject of planetary biology. 6. We recommend that NASA undertake a modest new program on the evolution of complex and higher organisms in the context of space. The program should be organized along the same structural lines as those of the existing planetary biology programs and should heavily involve the scientific community. 7. We also recommend that NASA's experience with the planetary sciences, instrumentation, new technologies, and experiments on orbiting and planetary spacecraft be brought to bear on the fundamental scientific questions wherever appropriate. Chapter 2. Life, terrestrial environments, and events in space. DMROP. A. The evolution of complex terrestrial life. An overview. In June 1980, a distinguished research group headed by Luis Alvarez hypothesized that one of the great mass extinctions of the geologic past might have been caused by the impact of a large meteorite, the extinction of the dinosaurs and many other species, about 66 miles ago, has long been a mystery. And although extraterrestrial causes have been suggested in the past, the Alvarez study revealed the first tangible evidence that such an event might really have occurred. The work of the Alvarez group has emphasized something that should have been recognized earlier: the Earth is not alone. That is, biological processes on Earth are surely affected or perturbed by periodic and non-periodic events in space. The case for a meteorite impact as the cause of dinosaur and other extinctions is not complete. Many other biological and physical factors might also have been involved. But even if we find that the dinosaurs died of non-meteoritic causes, the possible significance of extraterrestrial influences on life remains. Recent studies of cratering records on the Earth, Moon, and planets, coupled with counts of asteroids with Earth-crossing orbits, indicate that large body impacts must be relatively common over geologic time. Collision rates are high. Preceding page B. Think not filmed. Enough that their biological consequences may be important and should be assessed. And there are many other solar system and astrophysical phenomena that may significantly influence the Earth and its biology. Changes in the sun's temperature and luminosity, the dynamics of the Earth-Moon system, perturbations of the Earth's orbit, and supernova explosions are but a few of the phenomena that should be investigated from this perspective. We must begin to determine the extent to which the evolution of complex life on Earth has been influenced by these and other extraterrestrial phenomena. At present, there is a large and significant gap in our knowledge in this area. Thanks in part to NASA efforts, we have learned much about the origin of life on Earth and about the evolution of simple life forms during the first few billion years of Earth history. In general, however, NASA's studies do not encompass the evolution of multicellular organisms after their appearance about 1 billion years ago. At the other end of the scale of complexity, we are gradually learning more about the development of intelligence in geologically recent times, and about the problem of assessing the likelihood of intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. But what motivated biological evolution on Earth between 1 billion years ago and the present? Was the development of increasingly complex organisms during this interval inevitable? Could intelligence have evolved much earlier or later in the Earth's history? Are extraterrestrial influences important and necessary ingredients? Or did complex life evolve in spite of extraterrestrial influences? These are a few of the questions to be addressed in this report. The general objective is to identify the research that needs to be done to obtain a better understanding of the dynamics of the evolution of higher organisms, with special reference to the effects of phenomena of extraterrestrial origin. An obvious byproduct of a research program in this area will be better knowledge of the likelihood of complex and possibly intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. 1. The record of evolution. Fossils provide the documentation of past life on Earth. The first relatively complete fossil records of higher organisms start in rocks that are about 600 miles old, although sparse fossil evidence of simple multicellularity goes back at least 1 billion years. The interval from 570 miles ago to the present is generally known as the Phanerozoic. Rocks from this interval have yielded about 250,000 different fossil species so far. Consequently, there is an enormous database for the study of the evolution of complex and higher organisms. There is a popular misconception that the fossil record shows all organisms increasing in complexity throughout all of time. Actually, the fossil record is anything but orderly or straightforward. While it is true that life forms of the present, taken as a whole, show greater average complexity and diversity than do those of late Precambrian time, many groups of fossil organisms do not exhibit a simple, straightforward, general progression toward greater complexity through time. Some organisms living today, such as bacteria and some algae, are among the simplest at least in form that have ever lived. Certain organisms of early Phanerozoic time, for example, squid-like forms were as complex then as their modern relatives are today. Complexity has increased in many lineages over time by fits and starts in some, more gradually in others. But other lineages have experienced little change, or perhaps even decreases in anatomical complexity even as their contemporaries became more complex. It is important to consider the details of this irregular pattern of organic change as well as the general observation that the average complexity of organisms and communities has increased. The durations of fossil species are usually short compared to total geologic time. Mean durations or lifespans of species differ from one biological group to another, but it is rare to find a species that lasted more than 15 Meyer. Some species appear only for a geologic instant. Because Phanerozoic time spans 570 Meyer, there have been many turnovers in the biological composition of the Earth. When species or groups of species die out, it is rarely possible to say why. The species that replace the ones that vanish are usually not demonstrably superior. The new species may simply have filled ecological niches or geographic areas vacated by those that have become extinct, or they may have been partially responsible for the extinctions of their predecessors. In spite of the complexity of the evolutionary record, the broad outlines of ancestor-descendant relationships have been worked out by paleontologists over the past 150 years. We have also arrived at a reasonably good idea of the time ranges of the principal groups. In other words, the basic evolutionary tree of life has been worked out, and it is not likely to change very much as a result of further study. Furthermore, many major aspects of evolutionary processes are fairly well understood. However, our knowledge has many gaps. One such gap concerns the relative importance of recognized modern evolutionary mechanisms in accounting for major evolutionary patterns. In particular, our explanations of the origins and extinctions of many important life forms are less than satisfactory. As noted earlier, only within the last few years has serious consideration been given to possible effects of extraterrestrial phenomena on the evolution of complex life. 2. Dynamics of evolutionary processes. At any given time during the Phanerozoic, the Earth was populated by hundreds of thousands or millions of species. Each species was part of an evolutionary line of descent or lineage. It is important to note the distinction between species and lineage, as used here, see Fig. 11.1. Species are the many, separate non-interbreeding populations of organisms that exist at any given time. Each living species is the temporary terminus of a unique evolutionary line of descent or lineage. The lineage is, therefore, an ancestor-descendant sequence of populations. Several things can happen to a lineage as it progresses through time. It may remain static, in which case the species that constitutes the lineage remains unchanged for many generations. Or the lineage may be transformed by natural selection or by other means after which it is represented by a new species. In the latter case, the original species has not become extinct in the sense of extermination. It has simply been transformed beyond recognition. The term pseudo-extinction is used for this kind of disappearance of a species. Whether or not the lineage undergoes transformation, there is a statistical inevitability that the lineage itself will eventually die out. This is extinction, in the true sense, both of the lineage and of the terminal species. Such extinction causes a decrease in the number of extant lineages, and therefore a decrease in the number of living species, which could lead to the disappearance of all life. This has not occurred, however, because of the opposite process, speciation. Before a lineage dies out, it may branch to produce one or more new species that constitute the founders of new lineages. This means that a larger taxonomic group of organisms, such as a genus or family, can persist even, though some of its species lineages die out. In order for a constant number of living species to be maintained on the Earth, the number of branching speciation events must be at least as great as the number of extinction events. In view of the foregoing, it is clear that evolutionary patterns result from the interactions between the separate processes of extinction and speciation. Within this framework, evolutionary progress toward organisms of higher complexity depends upon both the appearance of new forms and the removal of some existing ones. Extinction makes room for the sorts of anatomical and biochemical innovations that are presumed to arise during speciation events. If extinction were to cease, evolution would probably come to a virtual halt, because evolutionary change within lineages is known to be slow and relatively inconsequential. If, on the other hand, branching of lineages were to cease, extinction events would eventually eliminate all life. With speciation and extinction as the driving forces of larger-scale evolution, it is important to identify the environmental factors that favor the two processes. 3. Extinction. Extinction goes on continuously in the natural world. Nearly all the species that have ever lived are now extinct. Some extinctions were probably caused by purely biological factors having to do with competition between species for food, living space, and other resources. But many extinctions, perhaps most of them, were due to perturbations of the physical environment. Such events as climatic change, including glaciation, geographic changes caused by sea level changes, continental drift, and other factors, and changes in the composition of oceans and atmosphere undoubtedly played important roles in extinction. If the Earth and its physical environment were completely stable, it is probable that many fewer extinction events would take place. As consequence, rates of evolutionary change might decrease. Occasionally, during the Phanerozoic, the Earth's biota experienced dramatic increases in extinction frequency. So-called mass extinctions occurred. The mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period, during which the dinosaurs and many other organisms disappeared, is an example. The Cretaceous extinction was only one of about a half-dozen mass extinctions, several of which were even more severe. The extinction that occurred during the final 10 Meyer of Permian time, for example, may have eliminated as many as 96% of the species of marine animals then living. There is considerable evidence that the present destruction of tropical habitats by man will trigger a new and comparable episode of mass extinction. The main effect of mass extinctions has been to reset evolutionary systems in much the same way that a fire or windstorm may reset an ecological system in a local area. One difference, of course, is that an ecological system can be repopulated by organisms from nearby areas of species that are identical to the ones that were eliminated. In the case of extinction, however, all new organisms must evolve from surviving lineages to replace the ones that became extinct. This resetting, with its accompanying evolutionary replacement of the exterminated species, may be a vital evolutionary process and may be necessary for the development of complex life as we know it. For example, the disappearance of the dinosaurs in the Cretaceous mass extinction may have been an important factor in making possible the subsequent evolution of higher mammals and, eventually, man. Mass extinction may prevent a steady state condition in evolution in which plants and Animals persist unchanged for very long times. The foregoing emphasizes the importance of understanding extinction processes, both at the scale of normal background extinction and at the scale of mass extinction. As noted above, perturbations in the physical environment are an important cause of extinction. We are just beginning to investigate seriously the relationship between extraterrestrial phenomena and extinction processes. The extraterrestrial influences may be indirect acting through such things as climatic change and effects upon plate tectonics, or direct effects of extraterrestrial events on plants and animals may occur. The Alvarez study of the possible relationship between meteorite impacts and mass extinction exemplifies the latter category. 4. Speciation. There are many mechanisms that contribute to the formation of new species. Most of these mechanisms involve the isolation of pre-existing species into separate non-interbreeding populations. Evolutionary innovations are continually being formed in each isolated population, and each may become a new and distinct species if different and suitable habitats are available. The new habitats that they occupy may originate in many ways. Most arise as a result of constant changes in the Earth's geography and its distribution of environments. If a new island is formed and is colonized by animals or plants from an adjacent island or mainland, the availability of unoccupied habitats on the new island and isolation from the main species population may enhance speciation. On mainland areas, many geological processes, such as the uplift of mountains, are involved in the origin of new habitats that new species may occupy. Thus, the heterogeneity of habitats on the Earth's surface and their constantly changing nature serve to stimulate speciation. Large-scale evolutionary change is believed to be the result of long-continued and or repeated speciation events. Because speciation is promoted by environmental instability, long-term evolutionary change is therefore prompted by changes in the physical environment. In turn, environmental instability may be caused or influenced by extraterrestrial phenomena. 5. Physical environmental factors. Evolution is heavily dependent upon interactions between organisms and the physical environment. As mentioned, heterogeneity and instability in the environment are very important. Heterogeneity provides the geographic separation of organisms and produces a variety of habitats that foster ecological specializations. Even such simple factors as diurnal light-dark cycles add to the number of ecological opportunities. The more separate habitats and opportunities there are, the more species can be accommodated on the Earth. With more species, the probability of the evolution of specialized and complex organisms is enhanced. Environmental instability is of long-term benefit to the evolutionary process, therefore, because it causes extinction, enhances the need for changing adaptation, and often has the effect of reshuffling the habitats and niches. At some scale, of course, too much heterogeneity and instability could be detrimental to the Earth's biota and its evolution. It is not yet clear how much instability occurring over what timescale is optimal for evolutionary processes. This may depend largely upon characteristics of individual species, their histories, and their environments. Figure 11.2 illustrates some of the complex interactions inherent in the evolution of life. Many of these interactions involve features of the lithosphere, many relate to the atmosphere, and many relate to space beyond the atmosphere. Before we can really understand the evolution of complex life on Earth, we must have more information about these interactions and the historical record of their significance for the last 600 Meyer. In the whole complex, the least explored and least understood features are those involving the direct and indirect influences of events in space on the Earth's biota. How has solar radiation changed over geological time? How have the tides in the Earth's oceans changed as a result of known changes in Earth-Moon distance? How have these changes affected life? Would nearby supernovae be expected to have biological effects? And if so, is there a record of such effects? These are but a few of the extraterrestrial factors to be considered in the body of this report. 6. Complex life elsewhere in the universe. On Earth, life existed in a very simple morphologic state, albeit with high physiological diversity, for about 3 billion years. Even after higher organisms appeared, it took about 600 Meyer to develop intelligence as we know it. Need it have taken so long? Most evolutionary biologists would say, probably not. There is no evidence that intelligence could not have developed in non-mammalian organisms. It may have been only a matter of chance that intelligence developed in the particular lineage that we know led to man. Octopuses and squids, for example, have sophisticated brains. Were their long-extinct relatives, the ammonites, equally sophisticated? What are the real differences, both biological and environmental, between their potential for intelligence and ours? Can this potential be assessed from a priori considerations? It is sometimes claimed that it is impossible to use the Earth's record to estimate the probability that any particular form such as an intelligent animal will evolve, because we have only one historical record, that of the Earth. On the other hand, one can argue that we have many partially independent historical records or experiments with which to work. Many separate groups of dramatically different anatomical construction the major plant, and animal phyla were already established by early Phanerozoic time, and these have maintained their identities ever since. Each of these major groups may be viewed as a separate evolutionary experiment conducted in partial independence of the others. Patterns of their evolutionary histories are readily comparable. It should therefore be possible to make far more sophisticated estimates of the probability that a particular life form will evolve than have been attempted heretofore. For example, powered flight evolved 4 different times in unrelated organisms, bats, birds, pterosaurs, and insects, and may or may not be evolving today in modern gliding organisms. From these and similar data, it may be possible to recognize the properties and circumstances related to the evolution of flight, and to estimate the probability that flight will evolve in some other Earth-like biosphere. Similar possibilities may exist for estimation of the probability of the evolution of intelligence and other biological constructs in other planetary settings. It may also be possible to assess quantitatively the importance of environmental perturbations and other physical factors that influence evolution. Would evolution of complex and higher organisms have taken place on the Earth without continental drift? How important are physical factors in causing mass extinctions? Similar questions can be directed toward the environmental regimes of other planets. Models of such systems can only be devised if the effects of physical environmental factors in the terrestrial and extraterrestrial realms are properly understood. These interrelationships must be assessed from a wide spectrum of viewpoints. Astronomy, physics, geology, paleontology, and biology will all play equally important roles in this endeavor. For the first time, we have the opportunity to combine diverse fields of knowledge in a study that will help us learn not only about the pattern of life on Earth, but about the possible patterns of life on planets elsewhere in space. B. Summary of research recommendations. The workshop group identified a number of research areas and specific projects relevant to the general question of the evolution of complex and higher organisms, to the effects of extraterrestrial factors, and to the search for complex life elsewhere in the universe. These recommendations are detailed in the body of the report as separate sections in each chapter. It will suffice here to present an overview of the principal research recommendations compiled by the workshop members. The recommendations fall into three broad categories: process and pattern in the evolution of complex life on Earth chapters, the through VB analysis of extraterrestrial phenomena as they may affect evolution on Earth or on another planet, chapter Z. C. Potential for assessment of properties of complex life elsewhere in the universe, chapter ZH. 1. Process and pattern in evolution. To understand the influence of extraterrestrial phenomena on evolution, a far better knowledge of the chronology of evolution must be developed. Vast quantities of data are scattered throughout the geologic and paleontologic literature, but at present these data must be collected by hand for statistical and other analysis. To improve this situation, a paleontological databank and clearing house for the relevant published information is proposed. With this databank in place, it will be possible to undertake rigorous statistical analyses of such topics as biologic diversification and mass extinctions as seen in the Phanerozoic record. In particular, analysis of extinction using data from strata containing evidence of large body impacts is vital in developing a clear understanding of the association in time between such impacts and any evolutionary events. A lesser but still important research initiative in this context is a proposal to use NASA's existing capability for image analysis to enhance photographs of some important yet poorly preserved fossils. The famous Ediacaran fauna of the late Precambrian is an especially appropriate target for image enhancement techniques. The purpose here is to maximize our understanding of the anatomical complexity of these ancient organisms, including that of their seldom preserved soft parts, for better delineation of the timing and directionalities of later increases in organic complexity. To better understand the processes of evolution, several research initiatives have been developed that address basic problems in evolutionary theory. These include devising better definitions of complexity in biologic systems, analyzing the physical limits of life forms, basically a problem in engineering and biophysics, identifying physical and biological factors controlling the rate of evolution, and studying the effects of extreme environmental conditions on an organism's ability to survive and function. Some of these studies relate directly to existing capabilities for global surveys from satellite data, and some relate to ongoing studies of the present and future habitability of the Earth. One research recommendation may have special relevance. The present-day loss of habitats in the Earth's tropical regions may be the beginning of a major mass extinction of species. By studying the destruction of tropical forests and the accompanying wave of extinction, we can learn much about the mechanisms of mass extinctions of the past. This type of study may also provide important answers to questions of environmental planning for the next few decades. 2. Extraterrestrial phenomena. The workshop group identified 5 major categories of phenomena about which new or expanded information is needed, or in which existing information may be analyzed from a new perspective. These are a frequency of large body impacts now and in the geologic past, bicyclic and non-cyclic changes in the orbit of the Earth, having potential for influencing evolution. C. Solar variability. D. Supernovae and their climatic and biological consequences. A. Galactic dust clouds and their possible influence on evolution. The research recommendations specify 2 broad areas of endeavor. 1. Compilation of the histories of these extraterrestrial phenomena as completely as existing data and new field investigations will permit, and 2. Analysis of their direct and indirect effects upon biological evolution, except for knowledge already accumulated on large body impacts and on a few other phenomena, such as changes in the Earth-Moon system. the general field of the geologic record of extraterrestrial phenomena is virtually unexplored. Likewise with the partial exception of supernova effects upon climate, little is known of the effects of these events upon evolution on the Earth. The greatest imagination and ingenuity will be needed to bring together the necessary theoretical and empirical approaches. Research in these areas will make use of existing information such as cratering records on the Earth, Moon, and planets, and other. Data from the full range of NASA programs, bold and innovative. Future programs, such as selected explorations of the geology of Mars, can contribute much to our understanding of climatic and other events that are unique to individual planets and events such as those caused by stellar variability and supernova effects that impinge simultaneously on all of the planets in the system. Throughout, the aim will be to document events that have a direct bearing on evolutionary processes as they operate on Earth and, perhaps, on planets elsewhere in space. 3. Complex life elsewhere. Questions about the evolution of complex life elsewhere in the universe are easy to pose but difficult to answer. One reason is that we have virtually no data. No life has yet been detected outside the Earth. However, there is now a good theoretical basis for the conjecture that life may be widespread in the universe. As we want to pose questions about the putative evolution of complex life in the extraterrestrial realm, we are constantly driven back to the fossil record of the Earth, where the database is large, and to the research questions identified in this report with regard to terrestrial evolution. As these research questions are examined and as strategies are developed in an effort to reveal solutions, it should be borne in mind that the solutions can be extended to address particular problems of the evolution of complex life elsewhere. For example, if it is found that meteorite or cometary impacts were of evolutionary significance on the Earth, what would be the evolutionary effect of a tenfold increase in the rate of collision of large objects with some other planet? Of a tenfold decrease, which environmental circumstances are necessary and which are sufficient for the evolution of complex life? Which circumstances would militate against the emergence of complex life? Are there regions of the galaxy or of the universe where life is impossible, where complex life might evolve much more rapidly than it did on Earth? What is the probability of the total extermination of complex life on Earth or elsewhere in the universe as a result of astrophysical or endogenous causes? Research pertaining to terrestrial life, therefore, can produce insight into the evolution and distribution of extraterrestrial life. Likewise, it is possible to pose testable questions that address extraterrestrial life explicitly. An important task in this area is to calculate the range of planetary sizes and other properties that would permit an Earth-like orbiting body to support complex life. If such a planet were situated at a suitable distance from an appropriate star, a second task is to determine whether the emergence of complex life is inevitable or highly probable once sophisticated eukaryotic cells have evolved. Third, and of special interest, is the controversial Gaia hypothesis, which proposes that living things have prevented drastic climatic changes on the Earth throughout most of its history. This view, regarded as highly speculative and tentative by many workers, has yet to be rigorously examined. If it proves to be correct, and if climatic stabilization can be shown to be a likely consequence of the activities of life on other worlds as well, then we may expect that extraterrestrial life is abundant throughout the universe. An effort should be made, therefore, to determine whether the Gaia hypothesis is valid. And other efforts should be made to determine upper limits of meteor bombardment, cosmic radiation, solar variability, and other phenomena that are permissive of the evolution of complex life and to identify galactic regions in which non-lethal levels of these factors can be found. These and other questions are stimulating and should be asked. We do not recommend devoting a large part of the resources of an ECHO program to addressing them, since they are clearly so difficult to answer at the moment. But we do recommend that attention be paid to them and that support be given to studies that show promise for making inroads into the problem of understanding the evolution of complex life elsewhere in the universe.